Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our final webinar for our Cost of Living campaign. I'm Laura Jameson, and I'm the Prevention Coordinator for Trading Standards Scotland. Our campaign is running throughout September and is looking to raise awareness of scams in online shopping where consumers may encounter counterfeit goods whilst looking for bargains, particularly when budgets are likely to be tighter. We're going to be talking about counterfeits in online shopping today, and I'd like to warmly welcome our panel and just to say thank you all for joining us. And if I can just invite you all to say a wee bit about yourselves. If I can start with you, please, Daryl.
Hello everyone, my name's Daryl McKelvey-White and I'm Vistalworks Marketing Manager and UK Accounts Manager. Vistalworks offers an intelligence service and risk profiling tools targeting online illicit trade. We specialise in highly regulated categories where there's a high risk of illicit trade and harm to consumers.
Thanks, Daryl. Good to have you here today. And Miles, if I can hand over to you, please.
Certainly. Thanks, Laura, and thanks very much for inviting me today. I'm Miles Rees from the Intellectual Property Office, with a UK government office that the primary function is to register trademarks, designs, patents, and manage some work around copyright. We also have a team that looks after enforcement. So enforcement is protecting consumers and businesses from counterfeit goods, but also from piracy, so illegal streaming services. So yeah, great to be here.
Thank you, Miles, and it's great to have you here as well. And Martin, if I can invite you in, please.
Thanks, Laura, and hi everybody. I'm Martin Allen. I'm Technical Director at the consumer safety charity Electrical Safety First, and what we do is essentially just to raise awareness of electrical safety risks that can cause injury. You know, we all use electricity, but you know, we need to protect everybody from the dangers that electricity can present. So we work on their behalf to lobby for changes to legislation, standards and that kind of thing, but we also provide loads of advice and information to consumers to help them make better decisions when they're buying products.
Oh, thank you, Martin, and it's great to have you here today as well. I think it's going to be a really interesting session, so we can get started. So yeah, we'll be having a wee focus on electrical safety as well. So I think it's going to be great to hear some of the case studies that you can give us, Martin, and I think it's going to be really great to have this opportunity to raise awareness about this area of work in advance of the likes of the festive period. Of course, not forgetting the current cost of living crisis, when people maybe are looking at ways they can save some money and also potentially save energy. I've seen some examples of products that claim that. But without further ado, I'd just really like to open up discussions, just really to ask the panel, so what are the dangers of buying counterfeit goods? Martin, if I could ask you to come in first, please.
Okay, yeah, sure. I mean, we've been looking at counterfeit products for a number of years now, and you know, essentially, that whole sort of profession, if you want to call it that, it's all about maximizing profit. You know, paying absolutely little or no regard to safety. It's all about maximizing the money, and then that money's used in lots of different illicit type of activities. So, you know, that means that safety components are either left out or they're using cheap quality materials and components. You know, every fake product that we've ever looked at has always been substandard, with many of them presenting sort of serious risks to anybody using them. And when I say risk, I mean a risk of electric shock, so mains electric shock, which can lead to electrocution in its worst case, or risk of fire. And if it's a battery, which we're seeing counterfeit batteries now coming out, we're talking about risk of explosion as well as fire. So, you know, it's really serious stuff we're talking about here, and that's why we all need to be sort of savvy shoppers, really, in particular during this cost of living crisis, where we want to save money, but you know, there'll be a few things that we'll touch on later in this conversation where it is important that you know where you're buying from and what you're buying.
Thanks, Martin, and actually really looking forward to hearing some more about the counterfeit batteries. I mean, certainly with any of the electrical products I've got, my hair dryers, my hair tongs, all things like that, I'm so wary about how I'm even utilising them, how I'm even switching them on, checking that. I'm so fastidious about it, and it's quite frightening to think of what can go wrong. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your further inputs today as well. Daryl, can I bring you in next, please?
Absolutely, and really kind of coming off, you pointed out there, Laura, about being very interested to hear what Martin was saying about the batteries, and I'd have to echo that. I think it's when if you're buying some form of electrical good, and you're thinking about anything that has a charger or battery component, when you're buying that and you get one with it, you're all well and good. But if that stops working, I think consumers, and I know I'm guilty of it, I'm saying this, I'm guilty of it myself, when you go to have to replace that, it's very easy to lean towards the cheapest one that you can find, because you don't feel like you paid for it the first time. So when you're going to replace it, you're like, well, I've not paid, why should I have to pay a lot of money for this? Particularly around things like Apple chargers, they're very expensive to replace any sort of specifically branded chargers and things. So I think from my point of view and from our point of view of Vistalworks, I think we're very interested in that side of things, and anything that it's parts that you're replacing of it, that they can be really expensive, but they're the ones you really need to be careful about and really need to watch when you do replace them, and that you're not going for the couple of pound option on eBay where you might be tempted to.
Absolutely, Darrell. It's so easy done though, isn't it? Especially when you're having a look in the price differential, and especially when you maybe are budgeting and you think, well, I need my phone, I need to have this, but I just can't stretch to that just now. But I'll buy that when I'm paid again. You know, I'll buy the real one when I'm paid. And you know what it's like, that just, you know, it goes on and on, because the other one, it's, you know, you feel it's working okay. No, absolutely. No, I'm really interested in this part of the discussion, definitely. Miles, if I can bring you in, please.
The only thing I would add to that, absolutely right. I wouldn't disagree with any of that. And I think, you know, electricals, the personal harm and the risk they present is just enormous. I would just add in something that we always mention, which is you're handing over your details when you buy these things. You're providing personal information, websites and things. And another thing that actually has come across in research that we've done is that enormous amounts of this stuff ends up in landfill. They're cheap and nasty, they break, and then people dump them. So, you know, I know it's something that perhaps, you know, isn't immediately in your thought when you're buying, but there's a huge environmental impact to buying this cheap, nasty products that last no time at all and just get dumped. And I think, you know, it's something that we're all becoming more aware of, our environment and the sort of economic and societal impacts of decisions we make. And you know, look after yourself, absolutely, but don't forget that you're dumping all sorts of nasties that aren't tested, and the products that are used in them are, in many cases, are questionable to say the least, and they're just going out in your rubbish, you know, in your black bag or into your wheelie. So I would say certainly think of that, but from the primary consideration is, of course, the risk that this sort of stuff presents, which is really quite frightening.
Thanks for that, Miles. And I think that's a really great point you make there, because you may think that you're saving money in the long term by buying something a bit cheaper, but like you say, how long does it last before that breaks? Then you need to replace that again. And, you know, for the length of time that the genuine product would actually last you compared to what you've had to do in the meantime, it's definitely worth thinking about. And especially when people are thinking about the financial sort of situation. Also, if you're in a family and you maybe only have a couple of chargers and you're sharing them, so they're being used on a regular basis, all these be things to think about as well. Now, that's all.
Laura, can I just add another point as well, that we talk about counterfeit, we talk about fake, you know, we talk about sort of dodgy products, and you know, we interchange the terms, and you know, we need to set this. There's the genuine counterfeit, if you like, that's really trying to mirror a brand, so it's really difficult, and I'll talk about some case studies later on. But then you've got the look-alike type products that sort of, we think they're that, but they're possibly not. They don't claim to be in their marketing. But then you also get the unbranded stuff, and we've seen loads of these in our investigations, but they've got counterfeit components such as fuses and capacitors. So, you know, it's just a way of making something very cheaply. So it's not trying to pretend it's something else, but it's just so substandard and got, you know, it shows a lack of control of the supply chain and just using anything to get their hands on, made overseas almost always. And so that it's just the whole mix between, you know, the fake, which is really mirroring a brand, against just this cheap type products that has got no control. It's not to any standards. And I think, you know, there are separate and legal terms when you get into intellectual property discussions, But in a consumer safety world, it's sort of the same subject. It's just something that's clearly going to lead to a dangerous situation. So I think, we want to focus on that angle rather than the complexity of intellectual property, which, that's one for the lawyers, really.
Oh, that's really helpful, Martin, actually, and I think that's a really good point to highlight in this discussion. So, no, thank you for that. So what we'll do now is we'll move on, and I suppose just building on what we're discussing, what might consumers not be aware of when it comes to counterfeit products? And have you seen any particular notable examples of dangerous products being sold online? And if you're able to share details of these, that would be brilliant. Daryl, if I can come to you first, please.
Yep, absolutely. I think, like with anything, like with quite a lot of product category areas, you see products that you're getting a picture of a particular item, that's not what's turning up. You're seeing products that they're clearly using a genuine brand's images. There's not any information about the actual product. I come back to this a lot when I'm talking about counterfeits and other illicit goods, but items that they're saying it's actually an empty box, and you find out if you go down into the really small print that it does not actually contain item. We see through our sort of checker tool that we've got on eBay and things, we see a lot of this, like what I mentioned earlier, the smaller items, the chargers and things like that coming through. We also, a couple of years ago, when the PS5 and everything were coming out, we were seeing as I'm sure everyone was seeing the boxes, the people selling pre-orders for things that hadn't been released yet. And my personal favorite one that I saw on an online marketplace, someone was saying that they were selling a PS3 and a PS3 and a PS2 together, so that marketing it as a PS5, not completely relevant to the discussion, but I thought would give everyone a little giggle. So things like that, but we're seeing a lot of the smaller items, phone chargers that are saying, kind of like what Martin was saying, some of them are not pretending to be Apple chargers, but some of them are saying that they're for Apple phones or for iPhones and things like that. So they're not actually saying that they're for a particular thing, using misspelling to keep themselves in the right, as it were, or not. But yeah, that's a lot of the sort of things that we're seeing coming through.
Thanks, Daryl, and I think that's a really good point about the misspelling of these items, and definitely one for consumers to have a wee watch out for when they are shopping online. Miles, can I bring you in, please?
Yeah, of course. I would echo that. I think phone chargers and items like that, we see a lot of that. We see a lot of just general consumer items that people buy, and they're not always a hugely considered purchase. I'm thinking of getting a new TV, and I've spent far too long looking at the specifications of the different things, and half of it I don't actually understand. But when I need some headphones or I need a charger, I'm through 3 clicks and it's done. And I think so. We see a lot of that. We see a lot of personal items, things like hair straighteners and products like that. And then don't forget something that overlaps 2 parts of my world, which is the illegal streaming boxes. So people who watch illicit streaming, they're often bypassing Sky and other people's systems, and they buy one of these. I was on holiday in Cyprus in April, and the man in the bar told me he had a dodgy box, and it was fantastic because it allowed him to watch just about everything. I didn't tell him what I did for a living, and but those, we know from testing, those boxes are extremely dangerous. They're not tested properly. They don't meet safety standards. We know that. We've evidence of that working with partners, including our friends in Electrical Safety First. And those are the sort of things that people plug in. The family are watching TV. They're on for hours and hours in an evening, and they are really the components and the quality of the products is very, very poor. So, be aware of almost anything you're buying. Certainly at the consumer end, the relatively lower cost end, there are significant risks across the spectrum. As Martin's already mentioned, counterfeiters or people who produce these sorts of products, and they're not always branded. So let's forget whether they're branded or not. They're just dangerous, and they're not fussy. They're there to make money, and you're probably the least important person. Once you've handed over the money, they're moving on to the next customer. So just really be aware of all sorts of consumer goods. That there's inherent risk in buying any of those, I would say.
Thanks for that, Miles. And just to come back to the illegal streaming boxes, I think that's a really interesting one, and particularly in the climate now, where people maybe are looking at where they can scale back. So they're maybe trying to cancel subscriptions to some of the other providers, and one of their friends says, well, I've got one of these and it's absolutely brilliant. You got all your channels and it costs me X amount of money. That is, it can sound appealing, but you've summed it up perfectly. Plugged in for hours on end. And because I don't think about when I've got my television on and you're just letting it play. These things are exactly the same. You don't give it that thought. So I think that's really helpful to draw that out. And Martin, can I bring you in, please?
Yeah, sure. And back to those boxes, really. Again, the people probably will never switch them off because they probably think they don't use any power anyway. So they will just leave them switched on permanently. So, and we have tested loads of them, and yeah, they're almost always awful in terms of the quality components. I mean, in terms of the true counterfeits, that really do put effort into mimic the brand, they are getting better at duping us. If we were in the physical room, I'd have a few examples, and you would really struggle to tell the difference between some of them. Some I would argue the packaging is even better than the genuine in some cases. That's how scary it is. So we've done a few trials with trading standards officers when we've been to exhibit at their conference, and it is a 50-50 guess which is the genuine and fake in many cases. So what we did a few years ago was we took that and subjected them to some x-rays. So we looked under the skin without ripping the thing apart. We looked at some leading brand hair straighteners, so GHD, because it's no secret that they haven't had problems in the past. The genuine one have got loads of components in there. You can see it on the x-ray quite clearly. Doesn't matter if you know what those things do, but they're all there to make sure it's safe and compliant, controls the temperature. Not that I need hair straighteners, of course. But when we looked at the fake item, it was essentially just the wires from the mains to the plates that you clamp to your head. There was nothing in place whatsoever. So you don't need to be a technical genius to realize that's not great. And that's just a way, that's the things that these counterfeiters do. But the overall outlook of the product, it felt pretty good. Similar weight, similar feel, similar plastics. It was just inside, it was just invisible. The same was with a kitchen blender. And this had no protection, that if you got a large fruit stone, for example, stuck in the blades, then the motor would continue to run until it sort of overheated and again lead to a fire. So we subjected that to test and showed flames coming out of the back. So these are the things that are being looked at. I mean, in that case, it was the packaging that surprised me. That normally you think, if I'm going to copy a brand's packaging, I would literally just scan it and use that. But no, if it was like one of those puzzles you get in magazines where spot the difference, it looked very similar from a distance, but when you got up close, there were some very subtle differences. So you think somebody's put effort into copying that rather than just scanning it and being lazy, like what I would have done. So again, but this is the time and trouble and effort they're putting into just even designing the packaging. And I say some of them were, arguably better quality than the actual brand. We've looked at phone chargers, Apple being the leading one in this case. And when we worked with them actually to do some sort of testing of many different variations of the same thing, and almost about 95% of those that we tested failed seriously. I mean, all of them failed on some degree, but 95% of them failed in a serious sort of way that could have led to problems. Some of them were so poorly constructed that at the end, the weight wasn't quite right. You could obviously tell there was nothing in there. So to make that up, they just put a bit of metal into the lid just to make the weight up. So quite clever or unscrupulous, really, just to try and make it feel like the same thing. And the quality of the metal in the pins was awful, so that they would snap off, and then you could leave that pin sometimes stuck in the socket. So you've got an exposed live part to anybody who can get access to that socket outlet. We've looked at even circuit breakers, that are in the installation that many of us don't even know where they are, in your little fuse box consumer unit, but they have got just a connection from one side to the other, no overload, short circuit protection, just a complete sort of just a switch, nothing inside it at all. And even fuses, the fuse that you have in all of our UK plugs, even those are being copied. You think, how can you make money on something so small that's so cheap? But it's because the volume is so excessive that it's worth doing it. And again, a fuse, what does that do? It doesn't do anything until there's a fault. But when we subjected that to a fault, it blew the plug up, because in every fuse, there's a tiny bit of sand that's in there that when this arc happens in the fault, the sand is there to put out the arc, so it clears the fault safely. Without that sand, the pressure builds up and it blows the plug apart. So something as even as inconspicuous as a plug fuse has been copied. So it's serious business. And more recently, we looked at, and it links into the cost of living crisis, there's a flurry of these energy saving devices, or claimed energy saving devices. The size of like a plug-in air freshener type thing. But one, they didn't save any energy at all. They were a complete waste of time. Arguably, they used energy because they had an LED in there just to show that it's operating. But the parts that were included inside were just awful, really substandard. Again, when we subjected them to our test, then they sort of, they went pop and bang. And again, the flames can come out and set fire to many materials that are close by. So the scale is huge. And I think in recent times, we really do need to be more savvy to make sure that we think we're getting a bargain, but in many cases you really, really aren't.
All I can say to that is absolutely, my goodness, wow, especially fuses, that's terrifying. That is really, really frightening. And just when you were saying that as well, Martin, I know that in some, and I don't know if it is GHD, if it is this brand of straighteners, but I know that there's one that if you accidentally leave them on, they do switch off after a certain amount of time. And for me, if it is, and like I say, if you think that you've bought those, or you think that whatever you've bought has that functionality, and clearly from what you're saying about the internal, there's absolutely no way. It's that difference between, it's okay, they do switch off, I don't need to worry about it, and carrying on with your day, but not knowing about the consequences of that, what that actually means. And that's really, really terrifying. And like you say, we don't need to know what all the different components do, just as long as they're working and that they're safe. But that's a real feature there, and that's quite frightening to think that people could just think, oh, it'll be fine, I don't need to worry about that, and it could be pretty catastrophic.
Yeah, you think you're paying extra money for those components, but you think you've got the bargain again, because that's the other thing that normally when you say what to look for, one of them would be look at the price. If it looks too good to be true, then it probably is, and that is sometimes the case, but not always. Yes. Some of them price point it just below the retail price, so it might be like an end of batch sale or just a short-term promotion. So you can't always go on the fact that if something's £100, it's been sold for £5, then you think it's likely to be fake. And you see with certain products, whether it's sunglasses abroad or whatever, and people again, that's got serious issues with the sun filtering, but people may not see that necessarily. But in an electrical product, the risk is real. It's talking shock, fire risk, and explosion with batteries, as I mentioned before. So but price isn't always the giveaway. You need to do a bit more depth into knowing who you're buying from.
And that leads us quite nicely into what should consumers be looking for when they're buying electrical products online. Miles, if I can bring you in first, please.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious starting point is the listing. What is actually available? What information can you draw from the site that you're looking at? Is it a well-known website, or are you on a platform, one of the trading platforms where you're probably not actually buying from Amazon and eBay? You're probably buying from a seller who is using that platform. There are lots of little telltale signs on those sites. You can find information, read the descriptions carefully. Don't be taken in by the feedback. Don't even instantly think that feedback means that it's true, because feedback is slightly questionable, and I think you've got to remain slightly cautious when trusting feedback. Or I would always recommend people do that. Just seller information is largely available. You can do some digging when you're on a website, and you can find quite a lot about the seller and the information around that. And the thing to do, one thing that I always recommend people do is when they do order these things, when they arrive, don't just rip it open, throw away the packaging and have the product. Just take a moment, have a good look at that packaging, have a good look at the printing. Are there any typos, spelling mistakes? Does it feel like a quality product? Occasionally, yes, as Martin has said, people will invest in packaging, and there are better counterfeiters and better criminals than there are, like anything in life. But a lot of them are lazy, and the actual packaging and even the sort of plastic that protects it just doesn't feel right. And that's the time to sort of think, hang on a minute, I'm not quite sure what I bought here, before you plug it in or you give it to your loved ones and take that sort of risk.
Thanks, Miles. Really great points about just taking time to look at what you've got, is it what you were expecting? And I think that's a great point as well about not being taken in by feedback, because who's composing the feedback, who's writing it. So again, it's just about taking that time to do your research. Martin, if I can bring you in, please.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was ticking up my list as Miles was just talking, thinking, fortunately, I'm second. I mean, Daryl's going to really struggle with, because we all probably got the same things. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's quite a short list for protecting yourself from the main things. But yeah, I mean, the main one is know who you're buying from. I mean, really, that is the most important thing. And we developed a couple of years ago a little extension for your browser called Check It Out. And that works on Amazon Marketplace and on eBay. And that sort of highlights, if you use that, that you're buying from a third-party seller. So that, and there's not, I mean, the information is normally there, and they're getting better at making it more visible, but it's just another sort of tool that you can use just to remind yourself who you're buying from. It gets more tricky because product scarcity is a bit of an issue at the moment. There's supply issues on everything, and so you might be more tempted to go away from your traditional sites that you use to buy products because it's not there. So you might start drifting away from the yellow brick road, and go elsewhere, and that's when you're going to get yourself into more sticky waters. But yeah, it's definitely worth knowing who you're buying from, and many of these third-party sellers are often located outside of the UK, almost always in fact, really. So yeah, know who you're buying from. If they are overseas, it makes it more tricky to get access to your money and any sort of remedial action as well. Like Miles said, yeah, check for spellings. That a lot of them are still careless, so look for that. It is worth doing some of the obvious ones. Don't take days reading everything, but check that it comes with instructions. That's another one. Even if you don't have to read the instructions, at least it should come with some. It's got all the safety information at the front, which is worth a look at. Check that it's coming with a UK plug fitted. All electrical products should have a UK plug fitted. We're seeing many products now, again, some of them linked to scarcity, but they're coming in without a plug, or they've got a Euro plug, European plug, and then they'll get a horrible sort of adapter, travel adapter like this, sort of thrown into the mix. Awful things. They're undersized, and without plugging a plug checker, if I put that against there, you can see the red, and the red shows that it's undersized. So immediately I know that's not compliant with size. So I can touch the pins and get electric shock, or high risk of shock. And also the openings there are awful. You can get your small fingers can get into that. And many of the manufacturers and importers are putting those adapters into the boxes to make a Euro plug compliant, but it's not. It's awful. It should come fit. Anything in the UK should come with a fitted UK plug that's got a fuse in it as well. Because we're also seeing plugs coming in that are more clover shaped. So slightly thinner than a normal plug, and they don't have a fuse in, and the fuse needs to be in there to protect against faults in the lead. So, check that it's got a UK plug and not have an adapter. Miles mentioned about reviews. Yeah, they can indeed be faked. It's something to check, but don't fully trust them. I think every little bit helps, really, in that thing. But you always come back to just buy from a reputable retailer that you know and trust, really. And like Miles said, before you just dive in and throw the box away and plug it in, if you do even get to that stage and plug it in, if you suspect it doesn't sound right, feel right, it's getting overly warm, making strange noises that you wouldn't expect, switch it off, stop using it, complain to the online retailer, and then the marketplace. And generally the marketplace themselves will get involved. And if you use things like PayPal, then you've got better protection on your money as well.
Absolutely brilliant, Martin. Thank you. That's really interesting about it should come with a UK plug fitted. I love the idea of the plug checker. I want one of those. I think that sounds absolutely brilliant. And I think what did it for me is when you said about the size and chance of an electric shock. So it's all these sorts of things as well. I think that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you for that. Daryl, want to bring you in if there's anything you want to add as well. But I saw you nodding at the clock checker too.
Yeah, well, yeah, first of all, Martin, that is very, very cool. I feel like every household needs one of those. They look absolutely brilliant. Although I would be slightly nervous, I feel. I'm pretty confident that we don't have anything dodgy, but you know, I feel like it would be I don't know if it become too obsessive with it or just the right amount, but it's certainly it's very, very cool, very cool. Yeah, Miles and Martin really have covered everything that I was going to say. My only other thing, to make sure that the item you're looking at is actually what you think it is, and I'll use a specific example to try and explain myself, because that probably wasn't very clear. But we did quite a lot of work looking at Dyson Air Wraps last Christmas. And one of the things that had kind of been highlighted as part of that is there's been so many reiterations of them, different barrel lengths, different colours, limited edition versions of the colours. They did a Valentine's one that's been purple, gold, pink, red. So because of that, it can, for us, identified that could really confuse consumers, because if you don't know, if you see, say, a blue one, for example, as far as I'm aware, that isn't one of their offerings. But if you see that and you know that there's been so many different editions of it, how do you know that isn't actually a genuine one? So I suppose from that point of view, it's just making sure you're doing the research and know that the product that you're looking at does actually exist to kind of help along and make sure that it's not a complete counterfeit from that point of view.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Daryl, because it's amazing they go through all of these different editions, and there just seems to always be different iterations, and different reasons and collaborations as well. And yeah, no, absolutely. I think it can be really tricky, because especially if you get used to knowing that this is what they do, it's so easy to maybe get caught up in that. No, absolutely. I suppose building on that question, and I appreciate that this is a tricky one, but is there any advice that you could offer to consumers who maybe are on a budget when they're buying? Is there any, I suppose, tips for them and what to be aware of? Like I say, I know we're building on the previous question. Martin, if I can come to you first, I don't know if there's maybe anything that springs to mind, or
yeah, I mean, it's similar to the above question. I think, you know, you're still, I mean, within any product range, you've still got the lower budget end against the top premium brand end. So there's the scale there, I think, between everybody who's looking to buy a product. So, you know, it gets the higher up the end you normally buy, then it makes it easier because you slip back a bit, but you're still buying a quality product. But again, if you buy from a reputable retailer and a brand that's got, you know, recognition, even their budget ends still will be safe and compliant. You know, they value their reputations. You know, they're not in the business of making dodgy substandard components. You know, that you've got confidence there. So it is about that brand recognition where you won't go far wrong if you're going into that space. I mean, it is a hard one. I mean, there's concerns over second-hand products as well. But I mean, again, if you're buying a second-hand, if you buy something with a high-end brand, then that might be better than going totally off-piste and buying something unbranded. I don't know. You know, I'm just thinking on my feet here now. Something else that I think to be aware of as well, and we've seen it quite recently, is with this change in sort of approach to selling and all these different sites. You know, TikTok is a thing that didn't exist before, you know, COVID, but now it's everywhere. You know, but we even seen influencers, you know, who are using their sort of reputation to sell products. You know, and we had a health and beauty hairstyler that was tied to something that was clearly a substandard product. So again, people, especially younger generation, buy into these influencers and think that it must be okay. So even that's to be wary of as well, you know. And I think it really all leads back to making sure that, you know, you have got that confidence in what you're buying. And I know it's hard when people, and with the, you know, you hear on the news every day the cost of energy, and it must be scaring loads of people, including myself, you know. And you know, it is frightening. And if you're thinking of buying another product, then yeah, you are going to look for as cheap as you can possibly get. But I think we all need to think about what the limits are. How cheap can a product be before it impacts on safety? You know, we did something on microwave ovens a number of years ago, and it got to the point where we saw the market racing to the bottom on price. But there is that tipping point. You get so far that you cannot make a safe and compliant item for a certain price, and that goes for everything. You know, there's design, manufacturing, but you need to get a test lab involved somewhere down the line. So all these things build on the cost. So if something is too cheap, then you've got to have concerns that they're not. But say, it's probably coming back to where I started from. But again, if you stick with the brands that is recognised, they will still invest in making sure they're safe and compliant. I think that has to be the best advice in my mind. It's not easy to force that down people's throats, because that's all right, but even £15 may be too much for some people. But it's just about making sensible decisions as best you can.
Thank you so much, Martin. And I think that's a really good point, actually, about, you know, how cheap can something really be that's still safe, that's compliant. And I think that is helpful. And sticking with brand recognition, what you're saying about influencers as well. I mean, it's just that's so popular at the moment. And it seems that when you are in social media, it really is bombarding, and it's all these different products that are on offer. And especially if they throw in, you know, if you quote such and such 20, you'll get 20% off. It's all, you know, it's all leading to, oh, that does seem really attractive, and they're using it and they look fab. And and it's just that consumer psyche of purchasing. And no, but I think that's really helpful, and it's a great one to draw attention to as well. So thank you. Daryl, can I bring you in?
Yeah, absolutely. I just have to echo with what Martin said, particularly like at the end of the day, things have a lower limit on price. So it's buying legitimate is going to cost you more, because the legitimate manufacturers aren't cutting corners, and it costs to make sure that they're not cutting corners and that regulations are being met, accurate testing is being carried out. There's always not as high-end versions of products. So again, like Martin said, looking at what other trusted brands are doing and seeing if you can buy the less expensive option. I suppose coming up to this time of year, another thing to bear in mind is big sale periods like Black Friday. Again, there's obviously issues at that time of year about counterfeiters, criminal sellers trying to sell counterfeits at that time of year as well. But if you're buying from reputable, known, trusted brands, if you can get a good deal at that time of year, that's great. And if you're starting to look now, then you have more time to look out for deals, because they do come up. And if you do, it's always that kind of gamble, isn't it? But in theory, hopefully the price of it won't go up too much heading into the later part of the year. But you might catch a good sale or something as we get closer to Christmas.
That's really helpful, Daryl, and I think it is good to start looking now and do that shopping about, especially if it is a bigger brand, and know the retailers who maybe do special offers closer to the festive period as well. And yeah, thank you for that, really helpful. And Miles, if I can bring you in, please.
I mean, yeah, there's not a huge amount I can add. I would agree with that. If you can buy from brands, you know, even their sort of budget ranges. I mean, you know, an example of things that I bought is Amazon run a basics brand. Now, you know, it's the lower end. I'm not saying it's really cheap, but Amazon protect their own brand. So they sell quite a nice range of electrical things like charger cables, if you want one that's very long, things like that I bought from them. But one thing also, I often say this, I always think about this myself, don't forget the high street, because the supermarkets are often surprisingly competitive. Certainly our friends from Germany, the supermarkets that do upset some big brands because they sell products that look very similar to other products. However, you can often get fantastic quality products on there in the middle, as they say, on those aisles. and they're often, you know, German tested, high quality products, maybe not brands you recognize, but for headphones and chargers, and okay, they're not there always, but often, you know, you can go into Asda or Tesco or Sainsbury's, and they'll often, you'll be surprised actually at their budget range where you can get a good quality product, properly tested, but it just doesn't have a brand on it. It's just their own product for a reasonable amount of money. And in the long run, that's a much safer buy than taking a punt on a product online that you frankly know very little about.
Yeah, that's a great point, Miles. And you, if you are in one of the supermarkets, you can pick it up, you can have a look at it, and it's just, you know, I think with the pandemic, online shopping has sort of become the norm, and people do forget about, you know, the wealth of items that supermarkets do sell. So I think that's a really nice point to raise and get people thinking about that again. And when they are out and about and thinking, well, it's here, I can just pop to my store, I don't need to be for it to be delivered, and how long is delivery going to take? So no, that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
I suppose also that all of those supermarkets all have online stores as well, don't they? So, you know, this is about online. They're all selling online just the same if you're not able to get out and about. I suppose the other point that I was going to say as well, that whilst it's always nice to get the latest updated model of a thing, but if you buy the model before that, they're normally offered at a discount price as well. So might not be your perfect choice, but if you're on a budget, then that's still a safer option than going elsewhere.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point, Martin. And no, that all really, really good. And I'm hoping that viewers are getting a lot out of this session. I really am myself. And I suppose just before we bring the session to a close, it's just really to ask you if there was one top tip you could give consumers about shopping online safely for electrical products, what would that be? Daryl, I'll start with you.
I think it would be do your research, know what you're buying, know what it looks like, what it's supposed to feel like. Bear in mind that I know I've already said the Christmas word, but that time will approach faster than any of us will be able to imagine it. And especially if you're buying stuff for other people, you may realize and make the conscious decision that you've gone for a bargain item, but the person you've bought it for may not realize, or likely won't realize and won't know what they need to look out for. So just really do your research and buy safely.
Absolutely brilliant point about, that's, I think that really does drive it home, especially if it is a gift for someone else. No, that's brilliant. Miles, if I can ask you, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's stuff we've touched on, but I would say the seller. You know, you really need to think about where you're purchasing it. What sort of website is it? Is it a specific site that's selling, or are they just hosting for other people? I mean, research we've done suggests that about 10% of people deliberately buy counterfeits, which copies of and fakes, which 10% of men, 6% of females. So you're in the slightly better camp, two of you. Martin and I are in the 10%. However, you know, those people, that just leaves 90% that are being conned. So the vast majority of people are actually just being ripped off. They think they're buying legitimate, and they're just absolutely buying a rip-off. They're paying, as Martin said, very close to the list price, very close to, or sometimes the list price. So the profit margin is incredible for these, and that's why these organized crime groups are involved in this. So really think about the seller, really think about the information that's available. Who are they? You know, where are they based, and do you trust them? And I think that gives you that little bit of research gives you a good starting point.
Absolutely brilliant, Miles. And yeah, that's an amazing statistic actually, that 90% of people are being ripped off and duped from this. So I think that really highlights the importance of making sure we're getting the messaging out there, and the work that you guys are doing already, all of you, is absolutely fantastic. And it's just about how can we keep on building in that to make sure that our messaging is getting through to consumers. And Martin, I suppose, final same question to yourself.
Well, without saying the same thing 3 times over, then I would just say to everybody to help to find out who you're buying from. Then download our Check It Out tool. It's free to download, and you can get it from electricalsafetyfirst.org.uk. But yeah, buy from a reputable retailer.
So I found this such a brilliant session, and for those of you watching, I really hope you found it useful. I thought it was fantastic. I'd like to thank the panel for joining us and sharing their knowledge and expertise today. It is so much appreciated. The discussion doesn't stop here, so please do get in touch with any questions you might have, and we'll make sure that they get to the right person and we'll feed that back to you. And you can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and sign up to our weekly Scam Share Bulletin to keep up to date on the latest scams, how to avoid them, and other information as well. If you want to find out more about the campaign, you can do so by visiting www.psscot.co.uk. And finally, just thanks again to our panel and to everyone who's joined us, and have a great day, everybody. Thank you.